I sank into the couch, my gaze fixed on the faint flicker of the television, though I wasn't truly paying attention. Laughter drifted in from the kitchen, her laughter. It had that light, flippant edge to it, almost taunting when she was around her friends. That sound used to bring me joy. Now it churned my stomach. It all began subtly. A quip here, a sarcastic jab there. First, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just overreacting. But soon, I started catching the things she said when she assumed I wasn't within earshot. I'll never forget hearing her chuckle and say, "He's so predictable. I could tell him anything and he'd believe me." So naive. That moment stuck with me. I had been walking by our bedroom when I overheard her speaking on the phone, probably to one of her friends, and I froze. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it. Her tone dripped with disdain, as though she considered me beneath her. I should have confronted her right then, asked her why she spoke about me with such contempt. But I didn't. I let the words fester inside. Over time, those little jokes grew sharper, more pointed. At a dinner party, she laughed loud and cruel when someone joked about how men like me never catch on. I glanced at her, and she gave me a knowing smirk, swirling the wine in her glass as though she was in on a joke no one else could understand. That was when something inside me shifted. I didn't argue or retaliate. I just began to disengage. Gradually, I pulled away. I stopped questioning her late-night outings. I no longer asked if she was really working overtime or if someone else was keeping her company. I didn't flinch when she made sly, cutting remarks in front of others. And oddly enough, the less I reacted, the more unsettled she became. Her laughter grew less frequent. She began hovering, clearly trying to provoke some sort of response. "You're awfully quiet," she would say, searching my face. "Is something wrong?" I would just give a small shake of my head and return to what I was doing. One night, she came in much later than usual. Her makeup was smeared, and her hair looked tousled. She stood there, expecting confrontation. I didn't offer one. I simply flipped the page in my book and stayed silent. That moment caught her off guard. Her confident smile faded. She began to understand that the man she used to belittle, the one she assumed would never notice the truth, was no longer the same. And for the first time in a long while, there was no laughter left in her. Weeks passed, and the dynamic between us had completely transformed. I had changed, and she sensed it. There had been a time when I would have bent over backwards to keep her content, when I would have fought to fix what was broken. But that man was gone. Now, I simply watched the unraveling of our relationship from a quiet distance, seeing her not as my partner, but as someone unfamiliar occupying space in my life. She didn't take this shift well. Initially, she tried to provoke a reaction. She would dress up more before going out, take longer getting ready, and spray on that luxury perfume I once gifted her. She'd pause just long enough for me to notice. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Her texting became more frequent, her smile growing wider as she looked at her phone, making sure I was watching. "Oh, it's just a friend," she'd mention casually, waiting for a reaction. I gave none. Her returns home grew later and her explanations fewer. Still, I didn't ask questions. I'd glance at the clock, offer a slight nod, and return to what I was doing. That frustrated her. Her comments lost their playfulness and gained an edge. One night, well past midnight, she slammed her purse onto the counter and burst out, "You really don't care, do you?" I simply shrugged. "Should I?" Her lips parted as if she was about to respond, but no words came out. She turned and stormed into our room, slamming the door behind her. I leaned back, letting out a slow breath. It was the first real emotion she had shown in weeks. But I still wasn't finished. I had known for some time that she was seeing someone else. The signs were obvious. But betrayal only has power if you allow it to consume you, and I had decided it wouldn't. So I turned inward. I poured my energy into myself. I started hitting the gym more often, dedicating more hours to work, and reaching out to old friends. I even picked up the guitar again, something I hadn't touched in years. Doing something purely for myself felt refreshing, freeing. That's when her panic really kicked in. She began attempting to reconnect. She laughed at my jokes with forced enthusiasm, reached out to touch my arm during conversations, cooked meals she knew I loved. She tried to step into the role of the devoted wife, but the gap between us had grown too wide, and she could feel it. Then, one evening, she did something unexpected. She looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years and asked if we could go on a date together. Just us, she said gently, her tone almost pleading. It's been so long since we've done that. I held her gaze for a while, letting the quiet stretch between us. After a few seconds, I offered a slight smile. I already had plans for that evening. Her expression shifted instantly, her face lost its color, and whatever amusement she had vanished completely. Later that night, I was stirred from sleep by the faint sound of footsteps moving back and forth in the hallway. The red digits on the clock beside my bed glowed 2:47 in the morning. At first, I assumed I was still caught in a dream, but then came the whisper of fabric brushing together, a gentle sigh, and the soft creak of the bedroom door nudging open. I stayed still. She stood there, not entering, but lingering silently near the frame, watching me in the darkness. I could feel her presence. Once upon a time, I would have reached out. I would have asked her what was wrong, pulled her close, comforted her, told her she was safe and everything would be all right. But that version of me was long gone. And she wasn't standing there because she missed me. She was there because she couldn't recognize who I had become. And that frightened her. By the time morning rolled around, she had returned to her usual routine. Sitting across from me at the breakfast table, she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, glancing up now and then, obviously waiting for me to bring up her late-night wandering. I didn't. You don't ask me anything anymore, she mumbled after a long pause, finally breaking the silence. I took a sip from my mug, pretending to mull it over. I guess there's just nothing left I need to ask. Her fingers tightened around her spoon. A laugh escaped her lips, but it was strained and empty. You used to be all over me. So obsessed. I raised an eyebrow. That wasn't exactly your favorite thing, was it? She fell silent. This version of me threw her off. For years, she had pushed, pulled, distanced herself, believing I would always chase after her, always stay close no matter how far she pushed me. But I had stopped playing that role. And for the first time, it was starting to dawn on her that maybe she had misjudged how far she could go. That weekend, she switched tactics. I had made casual plans to grab drinks with a few friends, nothing important. The moment she overheard me confirming over the phone, she suddenly showed interest in spending time together. She leaned in the bedroom doorway wearing an old shirt of mine with a wistful smile. We never stay in anymore, she said, tilting her head like she was reminiscing. Remember when we used to spend all weekend cuddled up in bed? I glanced at her briefly, then turned back to buttoning my shirt. No, I don't. The words hit her like a gust of wind. She blinked quickly, trying to laugh it off. Wow, you've really changed. I smirked. Yeah, I have. I walked right past her, picked up my keys, and stepped out the door. That night, I didn't get a single message. No half-hearted texts asking when I'd return. No fake concern disguised as worry. When I got home, she was sitting silently on the couch, eyes fixed on the blank television screen. It looked like she'd been waiting. But for what, I wasn't sure. For the first time in years, her face didn't show confidence. It looked unsure. And then something hit me. For so long, I had feared losing her. I had poured my energy into being the perfect husband, always striving to hold on, always trying to measure up. But standing there now, staring at the woman who once believed she had full control over me, I felt nothing. She wasn't the one being lost. I was. At some point, without even realizing it, my presence in our home had changed meaning for her. It no longer brought comfort or predictability. It was no longer something she could rely on blindly. It had become unsettling. And I could see it. In the way her eyes darted toward me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. In her hesitation before speaking. In the way she moved, no longer full of that effortless charm she used to wear when she believed I'd always be there, waiting. One evening I was reading in the living room when she walked in. She had on a short dress, the kind she hadn't worn around me in years. Every movement was laced with a quiet urgency, a desperate attempt to seem casual as she leaned against the armrest, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. I could feel her watching me, hoping for a reaction. Waiting for me to ask, to notice, to show I still cared. But I said nothing. Eventually, she cleared her throat. So, you're not even curious about where I've been? I turned a page. No. A pause stretched out between us, heavy and deliberate. I could almost feel the weight of her expectations pressing on me. She wanted to see a crack, a flicker of emotion, any sign that she still held some power over me. Instead, I just kept reading. She shifted her stance, her voice tinged with irritation. You're not the same anymore. It's strange. That made me smile. I looked up and met her eyes. And how does that make you feel? She opened her mouth like she had something to say, but nothing came out. And right then, I understood. She had never really imagined what it would be like if I stopped trying. If I stopped giving her the attention she had always assumed was guaranteed. She had spent so many moments mocking me, indulging in her petty games, and laughing behind my back that she never once considered how things might unfold if the dynamic changed. I set my book aside, leaned forward with my elbows resting on my knees, and spoke slowly. You know, I think you preferred it when I was the one constantly trying. When I was always pursuing you, doing whatever I could to make you happy. Back when you held all the power. Her lips parted ever so slightly, a quick flash of emotion darting across her face. Was it fear? Or maybe guilt? I let out a short laugh and shook my head. It's kind of ironic, I went on, because I used to believe that if I just put in enough effort, if I loved you hard enough, you'd eventually look at me the way I always looked at you. But now? I can't even remember what that used to feel like. The color faded from her cheeks. She tried to brush it off, rolling her eyes in an attempt to stay composed. Oh, please. Don't pretend like you've suddenly transformed into someone new just because you stopped following me around. I smiled faintly. No, you're right. I haven't become someone new. I just finally woke up and realized that I'd been pouring my time and energy into someone who never truly valued it. She inhaled sharply as if I had just struck her with my words. And for the first time in what felt like ages, she didn't fire back with a sarcastic comment or a smug laugh. She had nothing to say. Just silence. I rose slowly, stretched, and casually walked past her. As I reached the doorway, I paused and looked back over my shoulder. You should really get some sleep, I said lightly. You look like you could use the rest. Then I walked away, leaving her standing there with nothing to say. That night, she didn't come to bed. When I finally opened my eyes the next morning, it was late, and for the first time in years I felt something unfamiliar, peace. I used to be the one up first, brewing coffee, waiting for her to appear with a distracted smile before diving into her phone or rushing out the door. But now? Her whereabouts didn't concern me, and realizing that was incredibly liberating. I wandered downstairs, half expecting to see her in the kitchen. But the space was empty. The coffee maker sat untouched. There was no lingering scent of her perfume, no clinking dishes, no footsteps. Just silence. I nearly laughed at the irony. She was clearly trying her own version of my game now, hoping I'd chase her. But I wouldn't. Instead, I made breakfast for myself, took my time, and went through my morning as if I were the only one living there. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in ages, peace. Yet, I could sense a quiet tension in the air. It was like an invisible thread pulled tight between us, growing thinner each moment she went without the attention she used to feed on. By midday, the front door creaked open. I didn't turn around when she walked in, the click of her heels echoing across the wooden floor. I knew she was watching me, hoping for some kind of reaction. You didn't even call, she finally said, her voice carefully measured. I took another bite of my sandwich, unfazed. Why would I? She scoffed, clearly expecting more. Because I didn't come home last night? I gave a nonchalant shrug. You don't usually tell me where you go. I figured it was just another one of your late nights. That response clearly wasn't what she had hoped for. Her tone began to shift, her frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. You honestly don't care anymore, do you? This time I turned to look at her, leaning casually against the counter. Isn't this what you wanted? I asked. She looked puzzled. Wanted what? This freedom, I said, waving a hand vaguely. The thrill, the excitement, the adventures you always talked about with your friends. There was a tiny flicker in her expression, something breaking through for just a second. Funny how it doesn't feel so exciting anymore, I added, tilting my head, now that I'm not playing the role of the naive, desperate husband. Her mouth opened, but no words followed. She was completely unprepared for this version of me. For years, she had thrived on my emotional reactions, my jealousy, my pain, my need to win her back. But now? The balance had shifted and she was the one left off kilter. I stepped around her, snatching my keys from the table. I've got plans, I said with a casual tone. Don't wait up. I could feel her eyes following me as I walked out the door. Everything had changed, and she was fully aware of it. The evening air was cool as I drove through the city, the soft murmur of the radio filling the car. For years, my existence had revolved around her, meeting her needs, seeking her approval. But tonight I was doing something for myself. I met an old friend I hadn't seen in a long time. We found a quiet spot for drinks and spent hours talking. Sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. Felt good. Honest. Real. No need for carefully chosen words or stepping around someone's fragile pride. Just genuine connection. As I sipped my drink, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down to see her name. I let it ring. "Not gonna answer that?" my friend asked, raising a brow. "Nope," I replied, taking another sip. "I'm in the middle of something." And I meant every word. Later that evening, when I returned home, the house was mostly dark. The only light came from the faint glow in the living room. When I walked in, she was curled up on the couch, still wearing the same dress she'd left in, her arms wrapped around her knees. The moment I entered, her eyes met mine, scanning me with a mix of emotions. Maybe searching for anger, jealousy, or regret. But none of those were there. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I casually shrugged and kicked off my shoes. "Out." Her jaw clenched. "Out where?" I gave a slight smirk. "Why do you care now?" She straightened up just a little, something flickering in her expression that I couldn't quite read. "You never used to vanish like that." I let out a brief laugh. "And you never used to care when I did." The silence that followed stretched on. She wet her lips, choosing her next words slowly. "You've really changed lately." Leaning against the doorframe with my arms crossed, I replied. "Or maybe I just got tired of being the only one trying anymore." Her face lost some color. For the first time I could see it, the truth settling in. She was starting to understand the weight of it all. Every game she played, every sarcastic laugh, every time she acted like I'd always be around no matter how far she pushed me. It was all catching up to her. She had lived under the illusion that I needed her more than she needed me. But now, that illusion was cracking. I pushed off the doorway and turned toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed." I didn't glance back to see if she followed. The next morning, I woke to a silence that felt out of place. There was no water running in the bathroom, no noise from the kitchen, no exaggerated sighs from the living room as she browsed on her phone, trying to get my attention. The house felt still, too still. For a brief second, I wondered if she had left. But when I walked downstairs, there she was, sitting at the kitchen table. A mug of coffee sat in front of her, untouched and cold. Her phone was nowhere in sight. She wasn't scrolling or faking interest in anything else. She was simply staring at the tabletop, her fingers slowly circling the edge of the mug. When I came in, she looked up. Her eyes studied me, and in them, I saw something different: uncertainty. "You were gone for a long time last night," she said eventually. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and gave a simple response. "Yeah." She didn't press right away. She waited, clearly hoping I'd volunteer more. But I didn't. Her fingers twitched slightly around the mug. "Who were you with?" Taking a sip, I leaned back against the counter. "Does it really matter?" She inhaled sharply, barely noticeable, but I caught it. She was trying hard to appear unaffected, but it was a mask. I could hear the crack in her voice, the slight edge of tension. I saw it in how she kept shifting, like she couldn't find a place to settle. For years, I had been the one trying, adjusting, changing, chasing after the version of me she might finally want. But now that I wasn't playing that role anymore, now that I turned my energy inward, stopped jumping through hoops just to keep her interested, she didn't know what to do. I set the mug down and tilted my head slightly. "Why do you even want to know?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't know. You've been distant. I hardly see you these days." A small laugh escaped me. "That's funny. You never seemed to mind that before." She flinched, subtle but enough. I noticed. She looked down, fiddling with the edge of her sweater's sleeve. She trailed off like she wasn't sure whether to finish the thought. "I don't know how we ended up here." That gave me pause. Because the truth was, I did know. We ended up here because she always assumed I wouldn't change. She believed I'd always be around, reliable and constant, no matter how much she neglected or dismissed me. She thought I'd gratefully accept the minimal affection she offered, just like I always had. But once I stopped needing her approval, once I no longer played along with her unspoken rules, everything shifted. And she didn't know how to manage that loss of control. With my arms folded, I leaned against the counter. "What do you expect me to say?" She blinked at me. Do you want me to say I miss how things used to be? I tilted my head slightly. That I want everything to go back to how it was? That I'll keep fighting for you no matter what? She opened her mouth, but no words came. I let out a short laugh and shook my head. Because I'm not going to. She gasped slightly, caught off guard. What? Pushing away from the counter, I walked past her toward the door. I could feel her gaze locked on me, like she was trying to grasp how she had lost control of the situation so completely. I picked up my keys without turning around. I've got plans. Then I stepped outside. By the time I returned, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. I wasn't in any hurry. That house didn't feel like home anymore, it was just a structure I happened to sleep in. And her? She had long since stopped being the center of my world. That realization used to terrify me. Now it felt like liberation. The moment I walked through the doorway, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. She was already there, seated on the couch, clearly expecting me. As soon as I entered, her eyes met mine, studying my face like she was trying to decipher everything I might say before a single word left my mouth. This time, there was no phone to distract her, no sarcastic grin, no veiled jabs. Just an uneasy silence hanging between us. I quietly shut the door behind me and remained standing on the opposite side of the room. I didn't break the silence, I needed to see how she would handle it. After what felt like an eternity, she finally exhaled and spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't like how things are between us. One of my eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh. Her expression grew troubled. You've changed. You say that as if it's something bad. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. It feels that way to me. I gave a slow nod and settled into the armchair across from her. For years, I had been consumed with trying to interpret her signals, to figure out what she needed, and to shape myself into someone who fit her mold. But not anymore. That game no longer interested me. For once, I was focused on discovering what I needed. Her gaze dropped to her hands, which were fidgeting in her lap. I don't even know when I started taking you for granted. I let out a quiet laugh. I do. She looked up, startled. Her eyes searched mine. I tilted my head just slightly. The moment you assumed I'd never walk away. Something shifted in her expression. It was as if a piece of her cracked open, not just out of fear of losing control, but out of a real, deep regret. She didn't just look upset, she looked genuinely remorseful, aware that she had helped build this moment with her own choices. I made a mistake, she confessed. I don't know how to make it right. Leaning back, I sighed. I'm not sure you can. The silence returned, heavier this time. She swallowed, hesitant. So, what happens now? I observed her carefully. For so long, she had been the center of my world. I twisted myself into shapes just to keep her smiling, putting her happiness so far above my own that I forgot what mine even looked like. But those days were behind me now. That version of me no longer existed. Standing up, I drew in a long breath. I think we both need to find out who we are when we're not stuck in this cycle of making each other miserable. Her breath caught in her throat. So, you're really leaving? I gave a small shrug. I'm choosing me. She didn't argue. Didn't plead. Didn't search for excuses or justifications. And that, more than anything else, told me what I needed to know. She had already accepted that this moment was inevitable. Later that night, while packing my things, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, lightness. This wasn't the final chapter. It was a fresh start. A step into an unfamiliar version of myself, one I hadn't yet discovered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was genuinely looking forward to whatever lay ahead. And her? Well, I guess she finally realized, sometimes when you push someone away for too long, they stop coming back. And when that happens, the laughter stops.